Let this be the first and last warning. My voice was calm, almost emotionless, yet it carried through the enormous cathedral without the need to be raised. If anyone dares to make him cry again. I paused, tightening my hold around the hand resting in mine. I'll make sure it's the last day of your life. A suffocating silence engulfed the entire hall. He is Nikolav Blackthorne's husband from this day forward. Treat him with the respect that title deserves. No. I corrected myself, my icy gaze sweeping over the sea of faces before me. Treat him with the love and kindness he should have received long before he ever became my husband. My eyes darkened. And if I hear that anyone has dared to insult him, humiliate him, or make him shed even a single tear. My lips curved into a faint, terrifying smile. I'll handle you myself. Not a single soul dared to breathe. Before me stood thousands of guests who had traveled from every corner of the country to witness this wedding. Presidents of corporations. Political leaders. Media giants. Celebrities. Heads of influential families. Every seat inside the cathedral had been occupied long before the ceremony began. After all, this was the wedding of the Blackthorne heir. The successor to the oldest, wealthiest, and most powerful family in the country. Yet none of them had gathered because they admired the ceremony. They had come because of the unbelievable rumor. The cold, ruthless Nikolav Blackthorne had chosen to marry an ordinary Omega. An Omega who hid behind a pair of glasses. An Omega whose voice was so soft that people often asked him to repeat himself. An Omega who struggled to speak whenever too many eyes were on him. An Omega who had spent years being ridiculed, ignored, and treated as though his existence was a joke. The whispers hadn't stopped since our engagement was announced. How did someone like him catch Nikolav Blackthorne's attention? He's nothing special. That weak Omega doesn't belong beside the Blackthorne heir. How amusing. They still believed Jason needed to prove he was worthy of standing beside me. When the truth was the complete opposite. I was the one who had spent years hoping for the chance to stand beside him. I lowered my gaze to the Omega at my side. Jason Smith. My husband. His fingers trembled inside mine. Fresh crimson blood slowly slid down our joined hands. Moments ago, we had completed one of the oldest Blackthorne wedding traditions. A deep cut across the right palm. Then both mates pressed their wounded hands together, allowing their blood to become one. It was more than a ritual. It was an unbreakable promise. 2 souls. 1 life. Until death, and beyond. Jason's eyes glistened with tears. Perhaps it was because the wound still burned. Or perhaps because he had just married the man the world feared the most. A man everyone called heartless. He didn't know the truth. He didn't know that every scar on his heart had become my greatest regret. He didn't know that every tear he had ever cried felt like a personal failure to me. Most of all, he had no idea that I had been hopelessly in love with him long before he ever learned my name. The first time I saw Jason was 7 years ago. I was 17. A month earlier, I had buried the only person who had ever made Blackthorne Estate feel like home. My mother, Elara Blackthorne. After her death, the estate became unbearably quiet. The grand halls felt colder. Every room reminded me of the life we would never have again. I felt suffocated. So I disappeared. For the first time in my life, I left behind the name Nikolav Blackthorne. I exchanged tailored suits for worn jeans, an oversized hoodie, cheap sneakers, and a faded baseball cap. I wore ordinary glasses, darkened my hair with temporary dye, and blended into the crowds like any other teenager. No bodyguards. No luxury cars. No one calling me young master. Just me. I wandered aimlessly until I found myself standing before a modest family restaurant. Smith Family Restaurant. I still don't know why I walked inside. Maybe destiny had already made the decision for me. The restaurant was crowded. Customers filled every table. Yet my eyes found only one person. A young Omega. 14 years old. He rushed from table to table without stopping, carrying trays almost too heavy for his thin body. His glasses slipped down his nose every few minutes, and he would push them back up with a small, embarrassed smile before apologizing to customers, even when nothing was his fault. He worked harder than anyone else there. And somehow, no one seemed to notice. I couldn't stop watching him. His scent had only just begun to develop. It was barely noticeable. Soft. Gentle. Comforting. Like the warmth of sunlight after endless rain. For the first time since losing my mother, I could breathe again. I returned the next day. Then the day after that. For almost an entire week. Every visit, I looked slightly different. Different clothes. Different hairstyle. Different glasses. Sometimes I even wore colored contact lenses. I wasn't afraid Jason would recognize me. I simply wanted to remain another forgettable customer. We never had a real conversation. I ordered food. He served it. That was all. Yet somehow, those quiet afternoons became the only peaceful moments I had. Eventually, reality dragged me back. Business meetings. Inheritance training. Family obligations. Life moved on. But Jason never completely left my thoughts. Some nights, when the silence inside Blackthorne estate became unbearable, I found myself remembering that quiet Omega. Remembering the comfort of his scent. Wondering if he was smiling. Then, 3 years ago, I saw him again. This time, I didn't wander into the restaurant by accident. I went looking for him. Once again, I left the estate disguised as someone ordinary. A cheap jacket. A cap. Plain glasses. Dark contact lenses. No one looked twice at me. The moment I stepped inside, his scent reached me before my eyes did. It had matured. It was stronger now. Warmer. Richer. The same comforting fragrance. Only deeper. It settled around me so naturally that I almost forgot every burden waiting for me outside those doors. Then I finally looked at him. Jason was 18. His face had become more mature, yet he still looked exactly like the shy boy I remembered. Only, he looked exhausted. His cheeks had grown thinner. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes. There were bruises hidden beneath the sleeves of his uniform. He apologized even when customers were the ones treating him unfairly. Every loud voice made him flinch. Every harsh word made him lower his head. Something inside me twisted painfully. It was irrational. We were strangers. He didn't know my name. Yet watching him suffer felt like watching someone precious slowly disappear. That night, I summoned Robert. He entered my study without a word. For over 20 years, Robert had been my mother's chief bodyguard. After she passed away, his loyalty became mine. I want everything about Jason Smith. Robert nodded once. It will be done before sunrise. It didn't even take that long. Before midnight, the file was already waiting on my desk. Every page made my blood run colder. Jason's alpha father had gotten a male Omega pregnant. That Omega never wanted the child. Only days after giving birth, he abandoned Jason and disappeared without looking back. Jason grew up believing he simply wasn't wanted. His father eventually remarried. From then on, his stepmother made sure Jason knew exactly how unwanted he was. She treated him as unpaid labor. Overworked him. Humiliated him. Sometimes denied him food. Sometimes struck him. Her children learned quickly. Mocking Jason became entertainment. School wasn't any kinder. He was bullied for wearing glasses. Bullied because he was quiet. Bullied because he struggled to speak loudly. Bullied simply because he never fought back. By the time I finished reading, there was only one thought left in my mind. No one had protected him. So I would. From that night onward, Jason Smith was never alone again. He just never knew it. Robert created an invisible shield around him. Trusted men watched over him from a distance. Some became delivery drivers. Others worked as security guards, cashiers, cafe employees, taxi drivers, and even regular customers who quietly kept an eye on him. If trouble appeared, it disappeared before Jason ever realized he had been in danger. But that wasn't enough. Jason had no one his own age. No one who stood beside him. No one who would say, "I've got your back." So I quietly changed that too. One of the younger men working under Robert was close to Jason's age. Kind-hearted. Patient. The type of person who could earn trust without forcing it. I instructed him to find work near Jason and become nothing more than an ordinary classmate, then a casual friend. Nothing else. No lies. No manipulation. Just, be there. Months later, the impossible happened. Jason finally had someone who waited for him after class. Someone who walked him home. Someone who unknowingly stepped between him and the students who tried to bully him. Whenever things became dangerous, my man always arrived at exactly the right moment. To Jason, it was coincidence. To me, it was another promise kept. When Jason entered college and desperately searched for a part-time job, the cafe owner who hired him believed an anonymous investor simply wanted to support small businesses. The only condition attached to that investment was simple. Hire Jason Smith. Give him flexible hours. Pay him far more than the position deserved. When Jason searched for a place to live, the landlord unknowingly accepted money from me every month so Jason's rent could remain unbelievably low. When groceries became too expensive, the local market suddenly offered him generous student discounts. The bakery owner always slipped extra bread into his bag. The noodle shop near campus somehow gave him larger portions for less money. Every hardship that reached Jason, I quietly softened before it could break him. Jason always smiled and laughed about how lucky he had become. He believed the world had finally started being kind. He never knew that his luck had a name. It was me. Long before Jason Smith became my husband. Long before he ever looked at me as anything more than a stranger. I had already spent years loving him from the shadows. The next 3 years became the most peaceful years of my life. Not because anything had changed for me, but because everything had slowly begun to change for him. Every week, Robert placed another report on my desk. Unlike the first file I had ever read, these reports no longer spoke only of bruises and tears. They spoke of healing. Jason had finally started eating properly. The constant hunger that had followed him throughout his childhood slowly disappeared. His cheeks became fuller. He gained weight. The unhealthy paleness faded from his face, replaced by a healthy glow I had never seen before. The dark circles beneath his eyes became lighter with each passing month. Most importantly, he smiled. Not the careful smile he wore to avoid upsetting people. Not the frightened smile he used whenever someone raised their voice. Real smiles. The kind that reached his eyes. The kind that made everyone around him smile too. One evening, Robert entered my office with the familiar file in his hand. "There is something I thought you would like to know, young master." I looked up from my work. Jason is doing much better. I felt myself relax without realizing it. He still becomes quiet around strangers, Robert continued. He still lowers his voice whenever someone speaks harshly. I nodded. That much I expected. But around the few friends he completely trusts. Robert smiled. His voice has changed. He speaks clearly now. He doesn't constantly look over his shoulder. He laughs without fear. He even talks a little louder. I couldn't stop the smile that appeared on my face. Not because he had suddenly become confident, but because he had finally found people who made him feel safe enough to use his own voice. For someone like Jason, that was nothing short of a miracle. The young man Robert had quietly placed in Jason's life years earlier had become more than someone watching over him. Ethan had become Jason's genuine friend. They studied together, shared meals, walked home after class. Whenever someone tried to make Jason the target of their jokes, Ethan somehow always found a reason to stand beside him. Eventually, 2 more students joined their little group. Jason finally had friends. Real friends. People he laughed with. People he trusted. People around whom he no longer felt afraid. Jason believed he had simply been lucky enough to meet good people. Only Robert and I knew that luck had been carefully arranged from the very beginning. Watching him slowly heal made every decision worthwhile. Then, 1 month ago, Jason graduated from college. Robert placed a photograph from the graduation ceremony on my desk. Jason stood in the middle of his friends, smiling shyly as they celebrated around him. I looked at that picture for a long time. Then I finally said the words I had waited 3 years to say. It's time. For 3 years, I had forced myself to remain nothing more than a silent guardian. Not because I lacked courage, but because I refused to steal Jason's chance at an ordinary life. He deserved to graduate as Jason Smith, not as the future husband of Nikolav Blackthorne. He deserved friendships that existed because people loved him, not because they feared my family. Now that chapter of his life had ended. I had no reason to stay hidden any longer. That evening, I drove to the Smith residence. Not wearing a disguise. Not hiding behind ordinary clothes. For the first time, I arrived exactly as I was. Nikolav Blackthorne. The heir of the Blackthorne family. The moment my convoy stopped outside the house, the entire neighborhood gathered to watch. Jason's father hurried outside with an eager smile. His stepmother welcomed me so enthusiastically that anyone would have believed she cared for me deeply. Neither of them had the slightest idea why I had come. I didn't waste their time. I've come to marry Jason. Silence spread through the room. Jason stared at me, completely stunned. His lips parted. For several seconds, no sound came out. Finally, he forced himself to speak. There has to be some mistake. His words were soft and uneven, almost swallowed before they left his lips. He kept his head lowered, his hands tightly gripping the fabric of his shirt. I don't know you. His voice grew quieter with every sentence. Not because he couldn't speak. Because somewhere deep inside, he still feared that saying too much would only invite punishment. It was the voice of someone who had spent years being interrupted, ignored, or silenced. Before I could answer, his stepmother smiled greedily. If you want Jason, you'll have to pay us. I slowly turned my head toward her. I won't buy my future husband. The smile disappeared from her face. And I wasn't asking for permission. I came here to inform you. In exactly 1 month, Jason Smith will become my husband. No one spoke. No one dared. I walked toward Jason until only a step separated us. His eyes remained fixed on the floor. I softened my voice. You don't know me. Not yet. But trust me, I know everything about you. His eyelashes trembled. I know what you've survived. I know what you've lost. And once you marry me, you'll understand why I came. That same night, Robert quietly stationed Blackthorne security around the property. Some remained hidden outside. Others blended into the neighborhood. No one would lay another hand on Jason. Not ever again. The following month became a whirlwind of wedding preparations. The country celebrated. Jason endured. Every fitting. Every meeting. Every interview. Every ceremony. He followed me without complaint. But I noticed what no one else did. He never looked excited. Only nervous. Whenever I reached for his hand, he would hesitate for the smallest moment before allowing me to hold it. Whenever people congratulated him, he smiled politely. Yet his eyes always carried uncertainty. One evening, after another exhausting day of preparations, he finally found the courage to speak. We were alone. His hands rested quietly in his lap. You should leave me. His voice was barely above a whisper. You deserve someone much better. He gave a sad smile. I've spent my whole life hoping someone would love me. His eyes slowly filled with tears. But all I've ever known is being unwanted. I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering if this will be the same. The pain in his voice broke something inside me. I crossed the distance between us without thinking. Then I wrapped my arms around him. Jason went completely still. As though being hugged without fear or expectation was something unfamiliar. I held him until his trembling slowly eased. When I finally pulled back, I gently cupped his small face in my hands. His skin was warm beneath my palms. I wiped away the tears that had escaped. Looking into his eyes, I smiled softly. I've loved you for so long. That hearing you say no one has ever loved you. My voice became quieter. Feels like hearing the greatest lie ever told. I leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss against his forehead. Closing my eyes, I whispered. Just trust me. Give me a little time. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt how deeply you're loved again. And now, here we are. Our wedding day. 7 years after I first saw the quiet Omega working inside a small family restaurant. 3 years after I silently promised myself that no one would ever hurt him again. Jason finally became my husband. The ceremony ended beneath the cheers of thousands of guests, but I barely noticed any of them. The only person I could see was him. The moment the final congratulations were over, I gently took Jason's hand and led him to the waiting limousine. I wasn't interested in interviews, photographs, or celebrations. Jason looked exhausted. That was all that mattered. The drive back to Blackthorne Estate was peaceful. Jason sat quietly beside me, his hands resting on his lap. My eyes slowly drifted toward the white bandage wrapped around his right palm. The same bandage covered mine. The ancient Blackthorne blood ritual had left identical wounds on both of us. The cut on my palm was deep. It should have been painful. Yet I couldn't feel it. The only pain I cared about was his. I carefully lifted his hand into mine. Does it still hurt? Jason glanced at the bandage before giving a small nod. My heart tightened. I'm sorry. His eyes slowly met mine. If it weren't for the family's oldest tradition, I would never have let anyone hurt you. I gently pulled him a little closer until his shoulder rested against mine. My fingers carefully brushed through his soft hair. The elders believe this ritual is what makes us a true married couple. I smiled softly. But even without it, you've belonged beside me for a very long time. Jason quietly lowered his eyes. He looked ready to fall asleep. I gently stroked his hair again. Tired? He nodded. A small laugh escaped me. I thought so. When we get home, you can go straight to bed. Then I looked at him with an amused smile. But you have to stop answering everything with nods. I married you because I wanted to hear your voice too. So, talk to me. No matter how quietly. I'll always listen. For the first time that day, Jason smiled. It was tiny. Almost shy. But it was real. Seeing that smile made every year of waiting worthwhile. An hour later, our car stopped before the enormous gates of Blackthorne Estate. Hundreds of servants had already lined both sides of the entrance. The head butler stepped forward to welcome us. I simply raised my hand. Tomorrow. Everyone immediately stepped back. Jason looked so tired that his eyes could barely stay open. There would be plenty of time for introductions. Today, he needed rest. I gently intertwined our fingers and led him straight through the mansion. Past the grand staircase. Past the endless hallways. Past rooms filled with priceless paintings and antiques. I didn't show him any of it. None of those things mattered. Not when my husband could barely keep himself awake. When we finally entered my private suite, I quietly closed the bedroom door behind us. Jason immediately became nervous. His fingers intertwined tightly. His shoulders stiffened. His eyes wandered around the unfamiliar room before finally settling on me. He looked frightened. I slowly walked closer. You don't have to be scared. My voice was gentle. This is your home now. You don't have to ask permission before sitting. You don't have to ask before sleeping. You don't have to worry about making mistakes. You can do whatever you want. No one here will ever hurt you. His tense shoulders relaxed ever so slightly. Then I smiled. There's something I want to show you. I led him into my private study. The moment he stepped inside, he froze. One entire wall, from floor to ceiling, was covered with photographs. Hundreds of them. Jason serving customers at the restaurant. Jason studying beneath a tree. Jason laughing with Ethan and his friends. Jason carrying groceries. Jason sleeping in the library with a book on his chest. Jason smiling during graduation. 3 years. Captured one photograph at a time. Jason stared silently. Then he slowly turned toward me. What is this? His voice was quiet, filled with disbelief. I smiled. I told you earlier? I've loved you for a long time. I looked toward the photographs. See? It wasn't a lie. I walked beside him. My mother died 7 years ago. I thought I had lost every reason to smile. Then I met you. You didn't even know I existed. But somehow, your kindness became my comfort. He looked at every photograph again. Tears slowly filled his eyes. You? His voice trembled. Did all of this? I nodded. You are the most important person in my life. You gave me peace when my own world had fallen apart. You made me feel alive again. A tear rolled down Jason's cheek. Then another. Without warning, he stepped forward and buried his face against my chest. His fingers clutched the front of my suit. You're lying? He whispered. I'm not worthy of this. I immediately wrapped my arms around him. Holding him tightly, I gently kissed the top of his head. No. My voice was firm. Never say those words again. I slowly cupped his face in both of my hands. His eyes were red from crying. You are worthy of everything. Love, kindness, happiness, peace. You were always worthy. The people who failed to love you were the ones who were blind. I kissed his forehead. So don't ever question your worth again. Because I never will. He cried even harder. This time, not because he was hurting, but because someone had finally told him the words he had waited his entire life to hear. I slipped one arm beneath his knees and the other around his back before lifting him into my arms. He instinctively leaned against me, trusting me. I carried him to our bed and gently laid him down. Instead of moving away, I climbed in beside him and wrapped him in my embrace. I rested my head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. My hand slowly rubbed comforting circles across his back. A few minutes later, I felt his breathing become slower. His body completely relaxed against mine. Jason had fallen asleep. Safe, warm, held in the arms of someone who had spent 7 years waiting for the chance to love him openly. And as I held my husband close, I silently promised myself one last thing. No matter what happened, no one would ever make him feel unloved again. The following morning, for the first time in many years, I woke up feeling complete. Jason was still asleep in my arms, his breathing slow and peaceful. For a few moments, I simply watched him. The morning sunlight spilled through the curtains, painting his face in a soft golden glow. He looked peaceful, maybe for the first time in his life. I gently brushed a few strands of hair away from his forehead before placing a light kiss there. Good morning, my husband, I whispered. A few minutes later, Jason slowly opened his eyes. He looked at me in confusion before yesterday's memories returned. His cheeks immediately turned pink. I couldn't help but smile. After breakfast, I decided it was time. The entire household had gathered in the entrance hall. Hundreds of people stood waiting. Servants, managers, gardeners, housekeepers, guards, every person who worked and lived on the estate. Jason instinctively moved half a step behind me. I quietly reached back and held his hand. There is no need to hide anymore. He looked at me before giving a tiny nod. I smiled. Then I faced everyone. This is Jason Blackthorne. My husband. From today onward, he is the master of this estate. My words and his words carry the same weight. If he gives an order, you will follow it exactly as you would follow mine. If anyone disrespects him, you disrespect me. Every person bowed respectfully. Welcome home, young Master Jason. Jason looked overwhelmed. He quietly bowed back, thanking them in his gentle voice. I noticed many of the older servants smiling warmly. Not because he was a Blackthorne, but because they could already see the kindness in him. The rest of the morning, I showed Jason around the estate. The rose gardens. The glass greenhouse. The library that occupied an entire floor. The music room my mother had loved. The lake behind the mansion. The orchard where I used to hide as a child. Jason looked at everything with quiet wonder. Every now and then he would stop, simply taking it all in. I found myself watching him more than I watched the estate. His expressions were far more beautiful than any view. At one point, we reached one of the gardens. Rows upon rows of roses stretched before us. Jason's eyes widened. There, my favorite. I smiled. I know. He lowered his eyes, unable to hide the small smile that followed. Later that afternoon, while Jason rested, I quietly gave the staff another instruction. Decorate our bedroom. The head housekeeper nodded. With roses. She smiled knowingly. His favorite flower. Yes. But don't overdo it. I want it to feel warm. Not overwhelming. By evening, the room had been transformed. Fresh white and soft pink roses filled elegant vases around the room, their gentle fragrance creating a peaceful atmosphere. The fireplace burned quietly. Candles cast a warm glow across the bedroom. Everything felt calm. Everything felt welcoming. Just as I had hoped. When I entered later that evening, Jason was already there. The staff had helped him get ready for the night. He looked beautiful. Not because of the elegant night clothes he wore, but because he was simply Jason. The moment he saw me, I noticed the familiar nervousness returning. His fingers fidgeted together. His shoulders stiffened. I crossed the room slowly so he wouldn't feel cornered. When I finally reached him, I didn't speak immediately. Instead, I gently cupped his face. Then I placed a soft kiss on his forehead. Another on his temple. Another against his cheek. Each one slow. Gentle. Patient. I love you. A kiss. I love you. Another kiss. I love you more than you'll probably believe for a long time. He looked at me with tear-filled eyes. You don't have to be afraid. There is nothing you have to prove tonight. Nothing you have to earn. My greatest wish is simply for you to know that you are safe. I rested my forehead against his. And I'll keep telling you that? For as long as it takes. His eyes slowly closed. The tension in his shoulders eased. That night, we stayed together, talking quietly, laughing a little, and learning about one another without any rush. Every embrace, every kiss, and every whispered promise carried the same message. I had waited years for him, and I was willing to wait as long as he needed for every part of his heart to feel safe. The next morning, Jason looked a little tired after the long, emotional night we had shared. So I canceled every meeting on my schedule. Robert looked surprised. Young master, the board meeting. It can wait. My husband can't. The rest of the day, I hardly left Jason's side. We ate breakfast together. Read books together in the library. Walked slowly through the gardens. Whenever he looked uncertain, I reached for his hand. Whenever he grew quiet, I reminded him that he never had to hide his thoughts from me. There would be countless meetings. Countless business deals. Countless opportunities to work. But there would only ever be one Jason. And after waiting 7 years to call him my husband, there was nowhere else in the world I would rather be than beside him. The days quietly slipped by. Then weeks. Before either of us realized it. For months had passed since our wedding. Somewhere during those 2 months, Jason stopped looking like someone who was afraid of making a mistake. This estate had slowly become his home. And I had become his safe place. He talked to me far more than before. Not loudly. His voice was still naturally soft. But it no longer carried that constant fear that someone would interrupt him or tell him to be quiet. He would tell me about the books he had been reading. About the flowers blooming in the gardens. About the puppies the guards had rescued near the forest. Sometimes, while we were having breakfast, he would suddenly remember something and excitedly begin telling me about it before stopping halfway, embarrassed that he had spoken so much. I loved every second of it. Sometimes he even argued with me. Usually because I skipped meals. Or because I worked until midnight. You promised. He would quietly complain, folding his arms. That you would take care of yourself too. And you promised, I would answer with a smile, that you wouldn't worry so much. I can't. He would mumble. You're my husband. I always lost those arguments. And honestly, I never wanted to win. Whenever I worked inside my office, Jason rarely knocked anymore. He would simply open the door, walk inside, and come straight to me. Without asking permission, he would climb onto my lap. He had become so comfortable doing it that it almost felt like a daily routine. He would curl against my chest, resting his head over my heart while I continued signing documents with one hand and wrapped my other arm around his waist. Sometimes he fell asleep there. Sometimes he simply listened to my heartbeat. Whenever I looked down at him, I would find him already staring at me. Then, without saying a word, he would cup my face with both hands and begin placing tiny kisses all over it. My forehead, my cheeks, the bridge of my nose, even my chin. One kiss after another. Until I couldn't stop smiling. What was that for? I would laugh. I wanted to. That was always his answer. Simple. Honest. And I loved every bit of it. By the time 2 months had passed, another habit had formed. Every evening, the moment my car entered the estate, Jason somehow already knew I was home. Before I could even reach the front door, he would come running toward me. The instant I stepped inside, he would throw his arms around my neck. I would catch him automatically before he could lose his balance. Missed me? I would ask. He would simply bury his face into my shoulder and nod. That alone was enough to melt every ounce of exhaustion inside me. I would lift him into my arms and carry him around the mansion like that for several long minutes. The staff had grown so used to the sight that they barely reacted anymore. Only after Jason decided he had hugged me enough would he finally let me put him down. Robert once watched us from across the hallway before quietly shaking his head. The young master who terrified the business world has become completely helpless around his husband. I simply smiled. He wasn't wrong. Whenever work became too much, whenever meetings stretched for hours, whenever the pressure of leading the Blackthorne family became unbearable, I would pull Jason into my arms, bury my face against the side of his neck, and breathe in his comforting scent. The same scent that had calmed my heart 7 years ago. Jason would never rush me. He would gently run his fingers through my hair, carefully stroking it while asking in his quiet voice, "Was today difficult?" I would close my eyes and hold him a little tighter. It was. But it isn't anymore. Because somehow, simply holding him made the entire world quieter. One Friday morning, before leaving for work, I kissed Jason's forehead. "I'll be home early." He looked up from his breakfast. "Really?" I smiled. "I promised I'd take you into town today, remember?" His eyes immediately brightened. "You remembered." I'd never forget something important. Margaret, the head housekeeper, smiled from beside the dining table. "I've already packed everything you asked for, young master." "Excellent. I'll finish work quickly." Jason smiled the entire morning. He even spent nearly an hour choosing what to wear. Margaret later told me he had asked 3 different times if the outfit looked nice. Unfortunately, Blackthorne Group had other plans. An emergency board meeting turned into another. Then another. Contracts. Investors. Phone calls. By the time I finally stepped out of my office, the sun had already disappeared. I looked at my watch. Then my heart sank. "The date," I whispered. I had forgotten. The entire drive home felt much longer than usual. The moment I entered the mansion, Margaret was already waiting for me. She folded her hands politely. Then sighed. "You remembered, didn't you?" I nodded slowly. "Too late." "I know." He waited by the front window for almost 3 hours. Every word felt heavier than the last. When I finally convinced him to change out of his clothes, Margaret tried not to laugh. "He informed me that he was very angry with you." I couldn't help smiling despite feeling guilty. "My quiet husband? Angry? Oh yes." She nodded confidently. "And if I were you, I'd prepare for the storm." She wasn't exaggerating. When I entered our bedroom, Jason was lying face down on the bed with a pillow pulled over his head. He clearly knew I had arrived. But he refused to look at me. I sat beside him. No reaction. "Jason." Silence. I gently rubbed his back. "I'm sorry." Still nothing. "I forgot." "I don't have an excuse. I made you a promise, and I broke it." He remained stubbornly silent. I leaned closer and kissed the side of his head. "I'll make it up to you. I'll clear my schedule. And tomorrow, I'll take my baby wherever he wants to go." Jason immediately sat up. His cheeks turned bright red. For the first time since I had met him, he raised his voice. "Don't call me baby. I'm not your baby. And I'm not going anywhere with you." The room became completely silent. Jason blinked, realizing just how loudly he had spoken. A second later, tears filled his eyes. I shouted. Instead of being upset, I couldn't stop smiling. I had waited years to hear him speak without fear holding him back. I gently wrapped him in my arms. "You know what?" He refused to look at me. "I think your loud voice is beautiful." Jason buried his burning face against my chest. "I still don't forgive you," he mumbled. I laughed softly. "I know. But you'll still let me take you out tomorrow." After a long pause, his arm slowly wrapped around my waist. "Maybe." The very next morning, I canceled every meeting for the entire week. Robert didn't even question it. Margaret waved as we walked toward the car with our luggage. A mischievous smile spread across her face. "Enjoy your trip, young masters." Then she added with a playful grin, "And don't come back too soon." Jason looked confused. Margaret laughed. "I expect good news soon." Jason's ears immediately turned crimson. And Margaret? She only laughed harder while I smiled, slipping my hand into Jason's. As we drove away, Jason quietly hid his red face against my shoulder, making me chuckle all the way to our destination. One peaceful evening during the trip, Jason rested beside me on the balcony, watching the stars. After a long silence, he spoke so quietly I almost missed it. "Love? He hesitated. When do you think we'll have a baby?" I looked at him for a moment before gently drawing him closer until his head rested comfortably against my chest. My fingers slipped into his hair. I smiled. "My love, there is no rush. You've only just begun learning what it feels like to be loved without fear. I want you to enjoy this time." I still look at you and see the gentle young man I fell in love with. I kissed the top of his head. "I want to spoil you for a long while yet. We have our whole future ahead of us. When the day comes that we're both ready, we'll welcome our child with all the love in the world." Jason didn't answer. He simply curled a little closer, listening to my heartbeat. I had a feeling he still dreamed of holding a child in his arms someday. And when that day finally arrived, our son or daughter would grow up knowing something Jason had never been given as a child. They would never have to wonder whether they were loved. Because from the moment they entered this world, they would already have more love than they could ever measure. Hey everyone! Before we continue, this is the censored version of the story to comply with YouTube's community guidelines. If you'd like to hear the extended, uncensored audiobook, simply use the QR code on the screen or the link in my channel description to visit my Patreon page. Thank you for your support, and enjoy the story. By the 5th month of our marriage, life had become wonderfully ordinary. The mansion that had once felt cold and silent was now filled with Jason's laughter, his gentle voice, and the soft scent that had become my favorite part of every day. One afternoon, while we were sitting together in the garden, Jason suddenly looked at me. "Love?" I looked up from the report in my hands. He nervously played with the sleeve of his sweater. "I want to work." I blinked. "Work?" He nodded. "I'm getting bored staying home all day. I've finished reading almost every book in the library. I've helped Margaret in the kitchen. I've walked around the garden so many times that even the swans know me." A small smile escaped me. "So? I want to help you instead." I reached across the table and gently held his hand. "You never have to work." "I know." He smiled. "But I want to. I want to spend my days with you." How could I possibly refuse him? A week later, Jason officially became my personal assistant. Only a handful of people knew the truth. He wasn't hired because he needed a job. He was hired because there wasn't another person in this world whom I trusted more. His desk was placed inside my private office. Every important document passed through his hands before reaching mine. He checked contracts, organized schedules, prepared meeting files, and, more importantly, he reminded me to eat. Everyone at Blackthorne Group quickly realized something. Their terrifying CEO somehow smiled every time his assistant entered the room. On Jason's first day, I looked at him seriously. "I have one rule." He tilted his head. "What is it, love?" "When we're at the office, don't come near me." He frowned. "Why?" I sighed dramatically. "Because the moment you stand beside me, I stop thinking. I forget meetings. I forget business. I forget I'm supposed to be the CEO. His laughter echoed through my office. "I'll stay away then," he promised. Unfortunately, I was the first person to break that promise. Every 20 minutes. "Jason, can you come here for a second?" 5 minutes later. "Jason, I need your opinion on something." Another 10 minutes. "Jason, sit with me while I finish this." Robert eventually walked into my office carrying a stack of files. "You've called young Master Jason 12 times today. So? You could have asked me. I didn't want you." Robert simply shook his head. I noticed. Jason covered his mouth, trying not to laugh. One rainy evening, the entire company had already gone home. Only the lights inside my private office remained on. Rain gently tapped against the tall windows while thunder rumbled in the distance. Jason finished organizing the last folder before walking over to me. "Love," he smiled softly. "You're still working." I looked up, then completely forgot about the report in front of me. He was standing there with his sleeves rolled up, his glasses slipping slightly down his nose, smiling at me as though I were the only person in his world. I stood and walked toward him. He wrapped his arms around my waist without hesitation. I thought you told me not to come near you. I did. So? I lied. He laughed quietly. The rain continued falling outside while we stood together, holding each other in the peaceful silence. That night, we forgot about work, the company, and every responsibility waiting outside the office. The world seemed to disappear, leaving only the two of us together. About a month later, something felt different. Jason became tired much more easily. He would suddenly stop eating halfway through breakfast. Certain smells made him wrinkle his nose. Some mornings he simply rested his head against my shoulder without saying a word. Margaret noticed before I did. She quietly approached me one afternoon. "Young master, I think we should call the family doctor." The examination didn't take long. When the doctor finally smiled and said, "Congratulations. Young Master Jason is carrying your baby." The entire estate erupted with happiness. Margaret cried. Robert smiled so proudly that even the guards started congratulating us. The staff immediately began discussing nurseries and baby clothes. Everyone celebrated. Everyone except me. When we were finally alone, I knelt in front of Jason and gently held both of his hands. "I'm sorry." He looked confused. "For what, love? I should have been more careful. I never wanted this to happen so soon." His smile faded. "I wanted more time to take care of you. You've already suffered enough. I didn't want you carrying another burden. For me? You're still so precious. So sensitive. I didn't want anything to put you at risk." Jason smiled softly before placing both hands on my face. "I'm going to be okay. We're going to be okay." Then he guided one of my hands toward his still flat stomach. "Our baby is here now." His eyes sparkled with happiness. And I couldn't be happier. At that moment, every fear inside me mixed with a happiness I had never experienced before. I leaned forward and kissed his forehead. "I'll protect both of you. With everything I have." From that day onward, I barely left Jason's side. The family's best doctors were assigned exclusively to him. Every appointment was personally arranged by me. Every report was read twice. Every medicine was checked 3 times before he took it. Jason often laughed. "Love, I'm pregnant. Not fragile. I know. But let me worry." Pregnancy completely changed him. Some mornings he laughed over the smallest things. Other days he cried because the roses in the garden looked too beautiful. His cravings became legendary. At midnight he wanted mangoes. The next morning he refused to look at them. One evening he desperately wanted strawberry cake. The moment Margaret baked one, he wanted spicy noodles instead. Whatever he wanted, I found it. No matter the hour. One habit never changed. I still carried him around the gardens. Margaret would place both hands on her hips. "Young master, put him down this instant." Robert wasn't any better. "You're encouraging him." I simply smiled. "My husband likes being carried." Jason would immediately hide his red face against my shoulder while trying not to laugh. Neither of them ever managed to convince me otherwise. The nights were the hardest. Jason often couldn't sleep. His back hurt. He couldn't find a comfortable position. Sometimes he quietly cried from the discomfort. Those nights broke my heart. I stayed awake with him every single time. I rubbed his back, held his hand, read stories until he smiled again. And whenever tears rolled down his cheeks, I wiped away every single one. Months later, the cries of our child echoed through the hospital room. Our daughter had finally arrived. Healthy, beautiful, perfect. The moment the nurse placed her into Jason's arms, the entire room seemed to disappear. I could only look at them. Jason smiled through exhausted tears as he cradled our tiny daughter against his chest. "What should we call her?" I gently touched our daughter's tiny hand. "Giselle." Jason smiled. "Giselle?" I looked at him. "And her middle name?" "Ilara. In memory of my mother." Jason nodded with tears in his eyes. "Giselle Ilara Blackthorne." It was perfect. Later that evening, I quietly sat beside Jason's hospital bed, watching our daughter sleep peacefully in his arms. I leaned forward and kissed Jason's forehead. He looked at me with tired, happy eyes. I smiled. "I love our daughter more than I ever imagined possible." Then I gently brushed his hair behind his ear. "But you should know something." He tilted his head. "You'll always be my first baby." Jason laughed softly through his tears. "I know, love." Then he reached for my hand, holding our daughter close while holding mine at the same time. And in that quiet hospital room, I realized that everything I had ever prayed for was right there beside me. My husband, my daughter, my family.